All right, so today we're diving deep into Microsoft Azure and specifically its core architectural components. Um, it's kind of like getting a solid understanding of like the foundational building blocks. You know what I mean? The things that really power everything that Azure can do for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like looking under the hood,
Yeah.
seeing what makes it all tick.
Exactly, exactly. And we've gathered, a bunch of information from different sources to give you the complete picture from like the actual physical infrastructure of Azure to how it's all organized, like logically and everything.
Yeah, and going beyond just like a simple list of all the services that Azure offers, like really getting a deep understanding of like its structure, how it's all put together.
Right, right. And more importantly, like why that structure is so crucial. I mean, this is important stuff for anyone who's working with the cloud, right?
Yeah, for sure. And it's this structure that really gives Azure so much of its, flexibility and power. And I guess that leads us to like the most fundamental question, right? Like, what is Microsoft Azure? At its core, what are we even talking about?
Yeah, okay. So Azure at its heart is a constantly evolving collection of cloud services. It's like always growing and changing, which is exciting. And really it's designed to help you, the user, tackle those technology challenges you face today, but also, and be ready for what's coming next. That's the key, being prepared for the future of your business.
Right. And a key part of that is how adaptable Azure is. You get this freedom to build and manage and deploy your applications on this like massive global network.
Yeah.
And you can do it using the tools and frameworks that you already know, the ones you're already comfortable with.
Yeah. No need to like reinvent the wheel, right?
Exactly. And this adaptability comes from like some key promises that, Microsoft makes about Azure, about the whole platform. Enabling unlimited innovation, that's
Yes.
one. Bringing together your infrastructure, your data, the analytics, even AI, all of that stuff in a seamless way. And it's all built on a foundation of trust and reliability. So, security and all of that is taken care of.
So what does this actually look like in the real world, though? I mean, how does all this translate into actual uses?
So Azure has this huge range of services. I mean, we're talking over 100, and they're always adding more. Some people start by just taking their existing applications and running them on virtual machines in Azure. That's pretty common, kind of dipping their toes in the water.
Yeah, like a starting point.
Yeah, exactly. But Azure can do so much more than that, right?
Yeah.
Like imagine creating intelligent bots that can talk to your customers naturally, like have a real conversation, or, even diving into like cutting edge technologies like mixed reality.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
And that's just scratching the surface, really. I mean, virtual machines are great, but the really exciting stuff is in those more advanced offerings like the AI and machine learning services. Think about it. You can use these services to let users interact with technology using vision, hearing, and speech. It's incredibly intuitive.
That's really cool.
And the storage solutions, I mean, they can handle huge amounts of data and scale automatically. It's a testament to the flexibility and the sheer power of the cloud. And all of this is built on top of that core architecture we were talking about.
So let's say someone wants to try out some of these Azure services. What's the first step?
Well, first things first, you're going to need an Azure account.
Right. That makes sense.
Think of an Azure subscription, like your key to the platform. Whether you're an individual or an organization, you needed to access and use any of Azure's services. Like if you've ever done one of those Microsoft Learn modules,
Oh, yeah.
they give you a temporary subscription in their sandbox environment so you can play around and get some experience.
Yeah. The Sandbox is really great, especially for beginners who don't want to commit financially right away.
But for anything more permanent, personal projects or like real business operations, you need to set up an actual Azure account.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, you automatically get your first subscription.
So one account, one subscription.
Well, not necessarily. What's cool is that you can actually create multiple subscriptions under one account.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's particularly useful for big organizations. They might have one main Azure account for the whole company, but then different departments like development, marketing, sales, they all have their own subscriptions.
Oh, so it's like a way to manage resources and costs more effectively, I guess.
Exactly. Each department gets its own little sandbox to play in.
Now, what about people who are just curious about Azure? They just want to see what it's all about. Is there a way to do that without paying?
Absolutely. You can sign up for a free Azure account on their website.
That's great. So you can actually try out the platform and experiment with different services without spending any money.
Exactly. It's risk-free exploration. And if you decide you want to do more, You can always upgrade to a paid subscription later. There are a few different ways to get access to Azure. You can sign up directly through the Microsoft website, or you can talk to a Microsoft sales rep. And then there are also these Microsoft Cloud Solution providers, these partners who offer cloud services built on top of Azure.
So they can help you out with the more complex stuff.
Right. Exactly. They provide expertise and support. So you've got options.
So let's talk about that free Azure account for a second. I mean, what exactly do you get with that?
Well, it's actually pretty generous. You get 12 months of free access to a whole bunch of popular Azure products. Plus, you get a credit to explore even more services during your first 30 days. And there are also like 25 products that are always free no matter what. It's a really good deal, especially for people just starting out.
Yeah, that sounds pretty awesome. What do you need to sign up?
You'll need a phone number, a credit card, and either a Microsoft account or a GitHub account. Don't worry, they mainly use the credit card for verification. They won't charge you unless you choose to upgrade or go over the free limits.
Okay, that's good to know. And what about students? Is there anything specific for them?
Yes, there's the Azure for Students offer. It's similar to the free account, but tailored for students. They get 12 months of free access to a bunch of services, plus some credit for the first year. And the best part is, they don't even need a credit card to sign up.
Wow, that's really great for students. And while we're on the topic of learning, let's not forget about the Microsoft Learn Sandbox. It's such a valuable resource.
Absolutely. It's specifically designed for those hands-on learning exercises you find on Microsoft Learn. They give you a temporary Azure subscription to use within the sandbox. It's completely free, and when you're done with the module, all resources you created are automatically deleted. So you don't have to worry about accidental charges.
Yeah, it's definitely the safest way to learn and experiment with Azure. All right, so we've talked about accounts and subscriptions. Now let's shift gears and talk about the actual physical infrastructure that powers Azure, the real world stuff.
Yeah, let's dive into that. So imagine a global network of data centers. That's what we're talking about. Massive facilities filled with rows and rows of servers, all the power and cooling systems to keep them running, and high-speed network connections. That's the foundation of Azure.
It's kind of mind-boggling to think about the scale of it all.
It really is.
Yeah.
And Microsoft has strategically placed these data centers all over the world. But here's the thing. As a user, you don't actually interact with these individual data centers directly. Instead, they're grouped into these logical units called Azure regions and Azure availability zones. That's how Microsoft ensures that your applications are resilient and highly available.
So it's all about redundancy, making sure that if something goes wrong in one place, everything keeps running smoothly.
Exactly. If you want to see where all these data centers are located, you can check out Microsoft's Global Infrastructure website. They have this cool interactive map.
Okay, so let's talk about Azure regions first. What exactly are they?
So an Azure region is basically a geographical area. Within each region, there are one or more data centers that are close together and connected by these super fast, low latency networks.
Okay, that makes sense. So when you deploy resources in Azure, you have to choose a region, right?
Yeah, you're usually prompted to select a region. And your choice really matters because it can affect performance, cost, and even compliance.
Right, because data residency laws and regulations can vary from region to region.
Exactly. So you need to think about where your users are located, how much you're willing to spend, and what legal requirements you need to meet.
And I guess certain services or features might only be available in specific regions.
That's right. Some Azure services or even certain VM features might only be offered in specific regions. But on the flip side, there are also some core services like Microsoft Entra ID, Traffic Manager, and Azure DNS that operate globally. So you don't have to worry about choosing a region for those.
Okay, so that's Azure regions. What about availability zones? How do they fit into the picture?
So availability zones are basically separate physical data centers within an Azure region. Each zone is designed to be independent. They have their own power, cooling, and network connections. So if one zone goes down, the others should keep running. It's like having multiple backup systems built in.
So it's all about isolation and redundancy.
Yeah, exactly. And these zones are connected by high-speed, private fiber optic networks, so communication between them is super fast and reliable.
Okay, so in a region that has availability zones, you typically have at least 3, right?
That's right, usually 3 or more. This gives you a lot of flexibility in how you distribute your applications and data to make them more resilient. But it's important to remember that not all Azure regions have availability zones yet. So you need to check before you deploy.
Good point. Now, using availability zones sounds like a really effective way to build highly resilient applications. Much better than the old way of duplicating hardware, right?
Yeah, way better. It's much simpler and more cost-effective. You can just spread your critical resources like your compute, storage, networking, and data across multiple zones. That way, if one zone goes down, your application can keep running from the other zones. It's pretty seamless.
But I guess there might be some additional costs associated with replicating services and moving data between zones.
Yeah, there could be. So you need to weigh the benefits of increased resilience against the potential costs and decide what's right for your application.
That makes sense. So how are Azure services categorized in terms of availability zones?
Well, there are three main categories. First, you have zonal services. These are services that you specifically deploy to a particular zone. Things like virtual machines, managed disks, and static IPs. You get to choose exactly where they live.
Okay, so you have full control over their placement.
Exactly. Then there are zone redundant services. These services automatically replicate your data across multiple zones. So you don't have to worry about setting up the replication yourself.
So built-in redundancy, that's nice.
Yeah, very convenient. Zone redundant storage and some Azure SQL database configurations are good examples of this. And lastly, you have non-regional services. These are designed to be available all the time, no matter what. They're resilient to both zone-level and region-level outages.
So they're like the ultimate in high availability.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
So availability zones are great for protecting against local failures within a region. But what happens if something bigger happens, like a major event that affects the entire region, potentially taking down multiple availability zones?
That's a good question. I mean, it's unlikely, but it could happen.
That's where Azure region pairs come in.
Okay, so region pairs are like a backup plan for entire regions.
Exactly. Each Azure region is paired with another region in the same geographical area. Like, for example, West US is paired with East US.
And these regions are far enough apart that they're unlikely to be affected by the same event?
Right, exactly. Usually over 300 miles apart. So it's like having a built-in safety net for your data and applications. If one region goes down, you can fail over to the other region.
So if a major disaster strikes one region, Microsoft automatically switches everything over to the paired region.
Well, it depends on the service. Some services have automatic failover, but not all of them. In many cases, you need to set up your own disaster recovery and replication mechanisms.
Okay, so it's not always completely automatic.
Right. You need to think about your specific needs and how much downtime you can tolerate.
That makes sense. So besides disaster recovery, what are some other benefits of region pairs?
Well, if there's a big Azure outage, Microsoft prioritizes restoring at least one region in each pair. So that helps minimize downtime across the whole system.
Okay, so it's like a faster recovery.
Yeah, exactly. Plus, planned maintenance and updates are usually rolled out to the regions in a pair one at a time. So you have time to prepare and reduce the chance of simultaneous disruptions.
And what about data residency? Does that come into play with region pairs?
Absolutely. With a few exceptions, like Brazil South, data within a region pair stays within the same geographical boundary. So you can meet those data sovereignty and compliance requirements.
That's really important for many organizations. Now, you mentioned some exceptions. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So most region pairs are bidirectional, meaning each region acts as a backup for the other. But there are a few unidirectional pairings, like West India and South India. West India is secondary to South India, but South India is secondary to Central India.
Oh, so it's not always a two-way street.
Right. And then there's Brazil South, which is paired with South Central U.S., which is outside of its geographical boundary. And South Central U.S. doesn't have Brazil South as its secondary.
Okay, so there are some unique cases to be aware of.
Exactly. You need to understand these nuances when you're planning your disaster recovery strategy. Now, in addition to all these regular regions and region pairs, there's also this thing called sovereign regions. They're kind of special.
Sovereign regions, what are those all about?
So sovereign regions are basically isolated instances of Azure that are designed to meet very specific compliance and legal requirements. They're completely separate from the main Azure infrastructure.
So they're like their own little Azure worlds.
Yeah, pretty much. They have their own physical and logical isolation.
And what kind of requirements are we talking about here?
Well, a good example is the U.S. government. They have regions like U.S. DoD Central, U.S. Gov Virginia, and U.S. Gov Iowa, which are specifically for government agencies and their partners.
So they're extra secure and compliant with U.S. government regulations?
Exactly. They have enhanced security measures, screened personnel, and additional compliance certifications.
Okay, so they're like top secret Azure regions.
Yeah, kind of. And then there are the China sovereign regions like China East and China North.
And those are run by Microsoft?
Not directly. They're operated through a partnership with a Chinese company called 21VNet. So Microsoft provides the Azure services, but 21VNet runs the data centers and makes sure everything complies with Chinese regulations.
So it's like a joint venture.
Exactly. So sovereign regions are really for organizations that have very specific regulatory needs. They provide that extra level of isolation and compliance. All right, so we've covered the physical and logical organization of Azure's infrastructure. Now let's talk about how you manage all your resources within Azure.
Okay, sounds good. So we're moving on to the Azure Management Infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically a hierarchical system for organizing and controlling your Azure resources. It's made up of 4 key components: Azure Resources, Resource Groups, Subscriptions, and Management Groups.
Okay, so 4 levels of organization.
Right. It's like a pyramid, starting with the most basic element, which is an Azure resource. Think of it as any entity that you create or deploy in Azure. Virtual machines, databases, networks, cognitive services, anything like that.
So it's the smallest unit of management in Azure.
Exactly. Then you have resource groups, which are basically containers for related resources.
Okay, so you can group resources together based on their function or purpose.
Exactly. And one resource can only belong to one resource group at a time. But you can move resources between groups if you need to.
That's flexible. And what's the advantage of using resource groups?
Well, for one, it makes management easier. If you want to delete a bunch of resources or change their access permissions, you can do it all at once by managing the resource group.
So it's like bulk actions for resources.
Yeah, exactly. And there are some best practices to keep in mind. Like, it's a good idea to use separate resource groups for temporary environments, like development or testing setups. That way, when you're done, you can just delete the whole group and everything goes away cleanly.
That's a good tip.
And you can also use resource groups to align with different access control policies. So different teams or individuals can have different permissions for different sets of resources.
Okay, so it's all about organization and security. Now, what's next in the hierarchy?
Next up are Azure subscriptions. We talked about them earlier.
Right, the key to accessing Azure services.
Exactly. And they also act as a management boundary and a billing unit.
Okay, so they're like your Azure accounts organization units.
Right. Within a subscription, you have 2 main boundaries.
Yeah.
Billing and access control.
So you get separate bills for each subscription, and you can control who has access to what.
Precisely. And you might need multiple subscriptions for different reasons, like you might want to separate different environments, like development, testing, and production.
So you don't accidentally mess up your production environment while you're testing something.
Exactly. Or you might have different departments in your organization that need their own subscriptions.
So they can manage their own resources and track their costs separately.
Exactly. So there are lots of reasons to have multiple subscriptions. And at the very top of the management hierarchy, you have Azure management groups.
So management groups are like the big bosses of Azure management.
Yeah, pretty much. They let you apply policies and manage access across multiple subscriptions.
So it's like a way to enforce consistency and control across your entire Azure environment.
Exactly. And you can create a hierarchy of management groups, so policies applied at a higher level are inherited by the lower levels.
Okay, so it's a very structured and organized way to manage things.
Absolutely. Like, you could have a policy that restricts where virtual machines can be deployed, and that policy would apply to all subscriptions within a specific management group.
That's really powerful. Are there any limits to management groups?
Yeah, there are a few. You can have up to 10,000 management groups per Azure Active Directory tenant. The hierarchy can be up to 6 levels deep, not including the root level or the subscriptions themselves. And each management group or subscription can only have one parent.
Okay, so there's some rules to follow.
Right. But overall, management groups are incredibly useful for large organizations that need a centralized way to manage and govern their Azure resources.
So to sum it all up, Azure's architecture is built on this global network of data centers, organized into regions and availability zones for redundancy and high availability. And then you have these layers of management with resources, resource groups, subscriptions, and management groups to keep everything organized and under control. It's a pretty comprehensive system.
Absolutely. It's designed to be both flexible and powerful, giving you the freedom to build and manage your cloud solutions in a way that meets your specific needs.
Yeah.
And as Azure continues to evolve and grow, having a good understanding of these core architectural components is going to become even more important. It's going to allow you to leverage those new services and capabilities effectively. and build even more resilient and innovative solutions. So that brings us to the end of this episode of Mastering Azure Fundamentals. Today we focused on the core architectural components of Azure. We talked about regions, availability zones, region pairs, sovereign regions, and the whole management infrastructure. It's a lot to take in, but hopefully you have a better understanding of how Azure is put together and how it all works.
And if you want to learn even more, you can check out the book Mastering Azure Fundamentals AZ900 Exam Prep. It's available on Amazon, and you can find a link in the episode description. Thanks for listening.